It is a tale of two cities. In Asunción, Paraguay, the air is thick and warm. Dignitaries in suits are shaking hands, celebrating a moment 25 years in the making. But thousands of kilometers away, in the great chill of Strasbourg in France, this week the atmosphere will be very different. There will be less handshakes here, only the roar of engines and the sound of farmers' protests, with the Mercosur deal reaching the EU Parliament. With it, we are witnessing the conclusion of a negotiation marathon that has spanned over a quarter of a century, landing in a world that looks very different from when it started. As the EU is doubling down on neoliberal trading patterns, today's episode will have a closer look at the economic background of the deal. And with that, welcome to this episode of On Point, the news brief that looks behind the headlines on social issues, health policies, and economic developments in and around Europe. My name is Felix Lassmannsholt. Let's start with the facts on the ground. After 26 years of stop-and-go negotiations, the European Union is on the very verge of signing the trade agreement with the Mercosur bloc, comprising Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has traveled to South America, specifically to Asunción, Paraguay, to put the pen to paper. The scale of this agreement is staggering. Von der Leyen calls it the creation of the largest free trade zone in the world, covering a market of over 700 million people. Concretely, the Commission proposes to eliminate the vast majority of tariffs between the two blocs. This is expected to save European companies about 4 billion euros annually in customs duties and potentially boost EU exports by nearly 50 billion euros by 2040. But why this push through now? The Commission's argument is geopolitical. Von der Leyen describes the current global landscape as increasingly hostile and transactional. The goal is to diversify trade relations and reduce Europe's dangerous dependencies on China and the United States. In this sense, the deal is strategically designed to secure access to critical raw materials. The European industry is hungry for lithium, niobium, and other minerals essential for the green and digital transition, and Latin America holds some of the world's largest reserves. Economists at the Bruegel think tank support this logic of diversification. They argue that in a world where the US is retreating from multilateralism and China is weaponizing trade, the EU must de-risk. Bruegel experts emphasize that the EU needs to build broad alliances with countries willing to maintain rules-based cooperation. For them, this deal is a necessary insurance policy, a way to secure supply chains when the old global order is cracking. However, if the Commission sees this as a geopolitical win, a massive coalition of critics sees it as a disaster. The resistance is coming from almost every direction: environmentalists, unions, farmers, and politicians from the left and right. Let's look at the green perspective. Anna Cavazzini, a leading Green member of the European Parliament and expert on trade policies, warns that this agreement cements neocolonial patterns. The economic dynamic is stark. Europe exports high-value industrial goods like combustion engine cars, machinery, and pesticides, while importing raw materials and agricultural commodities. Cavazzini argues this asymmetry hinders the industrial development of South American partners and incentivizes an economic model based on resource extraction. The ecological cost of this model is terrifying. Critics point to studies suggesting the deal could threaten an additional 700,000 hectares of the Amazon rainforest, pushing the ecosystem closer to a tipping point. And then there's the question of democracy. The left in the European Parliament has slammed the whole process as an anti-democratic maneuver. They are furious that von der Leyen is rushing to sign the deal before the European Parliament has even had the chance to vote on it. They, along with other factions, are even initiating a vote to send the agreement to the European Court of Justice to check its compatibility with EU treaties, which could delay the ratification by a year or more. Labor unions are also sounding the alarm. The European Trade Union Confederation warns of social dumping. They fear that opening the European market to goods produced under lower labor standards and wages in South America will deepen inequality and undermine European workers. But the loudest noise is currently coming from the agricultural sector. European farmers are mobilizing, with major protests called for this Tuesday, January 20th, in Strasbourg. Farmers argue that they are caught in a price squeeze, facing rising costs for energy and fertilizer, while being threatened by cheap beef, poultry, and sugar imports from Mercosur agricultural giants. However, we must add a critical note here. While there surely is some merit to their point and farmers' protest against unfair competition, the European agricultural sector is itself heavily subsidized. Through the Common Agricultural Policy, a main pillar of European policymaking, farmers receive massive financial support from Brussels, meaning they do not operate in a truly free market either. Their fear is that even with those heavy EU-funded subsidies, farmers cannot compete with the sheer scale of South American agribusiness. So, who actually wants the deal? Well, the applause is coming from big business. Associations like Business Europe and the car manufacturers lobby, IKEA, call the agreement vital. For the German car industry, for example, this is a massive win. Tariffs on car exports to Mercosur, which currently sit at 35%, would be eliminated. For European industry, struggling with stagnation, this market access is a ray of hope, as they call it, to offset losses in China and Russia. But what about the impact on Latin America? Well, the deal promises investment. Critics argue it locks Mercosur countries into the role of raw material suppliers, the primarization of their economies, as it's called, rather than helping them develop their own high-tech industries. And that is also why some Brazilian trade unions voiced sharp critique of the deal. Beyond these immediate protests, we need to understand the structural economic forces at play. For this, we turn to policy experts from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, a foundation affiliated with the Social Democrats, who are to vote in favor of the Mercosur deal as they see it as a strategic necessity. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung experts analyze that the EU's current trade regime is outdated. It was built for a world of hyperglobalization that no longer exists. They argue that simply trying to export our way out of stagnation, the old export-led growth, is hitting a wall. The experts argue that we need to move beyond neoliberalism in trade policy. Instead, they propose a concept called defensive regionalism. What does this mean concretely? Well, first, it means prioritizing domestic investment over exports. The EU should focus on the green and digital transformation within Europe to generate growth, rather than relying on foreign markets to buy European surplus goods. And that would mean boosting internal demand. Second, they suggest conditional protectionism. This means protecting strategic domestic industries like green steel or batteries, but tying that protection to strict conditions. Companies receiving support must reinvest profits into transformation and jobs, rather than paying out dividends. This would mean implementing a growth model that actually builds the foundation of an economy, albeit capitalist, for the decades to come, they argue. This aligns with some suggestions from Bruegel economists as well, who call for identifying supply chain choke points and using the new anti-coercion instrument in the European Union to protect European interests. Bruegel experts also suggest clean trade and investment partnerships that offer real financial support to partner countries rather than just tariff cuts. But, and this is the crucial but, we have to be realistic about the political landscape. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung perspective of shifting toward domestic demand and redistribution is currently marginal in Brussels. Why? Well, because of the immense pressure of overaccumulation. The global economy China, India, the United States, and the European economy, particularly the German industrial core, produce far more than internal consumption can absorb. Years of austerity and wage suppression have crushed domestic demand, with productivity growth vastly outpacing wage growth. As a result, European capital must find new export markets to survive. This is the vicious circle of export-driven growth models. The structural compulsion to export is why the Commission is pushing the Mercosur deal so aggressively, despite the environmental risks and the democratic deficit that comes with it. The reluctance to redistribute wealth within Europe and globally and boost internal demand leaves the EU with one option: double down on the neoliberal trade model, opening markets abroad to keep the engines running at home. Or as Ursula von der Leyen said it in front of business representatives in September, this is a market we must conquer. That's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any thoughts on the episode, please feel free to share them in the comments or send me a message. To stay up to date, subscribe to my newsletter, and if you want to support my work, you can follow my Substack. You can find the link in the description. My name is Felix Sassmannshausen. Until next week.